Welcome into Between the Pylons. I'm John Camacho.
And this is Jacob Waters.
Missed the beat there.
Yeah,
I was a little late. Yeah, we're back. We're here. We exist again, at least to the internet. And we are doing a series of videos for the next couple days, which is basically breaking it down by division, doing some fantasy rankings, just talking about each team. And you had a speech prepared for coming back. If you want to start now.
You know me. I always have long speeches prepared.
Yeah.
I'll say it was a good off season. Mm-hmm. We're ready for the season now. Okay. And going forward, we are going to be talking about the season since we were off on the off season.
You said you had like some analogy to pineapples. Is there?
Nope. But all the swingers out there listening know. So we always try to tap into new markets here.
We're constantly just trying to get other people to listen. Yes.
Yeah.
And we'll do anything. We're whores for listeners.
Sort of. Sort of. God, right. I don't know. Fuck the Packers. I'll never do that.
But we're gonna get into the AFC South.
We're doing South. AFC South.
All
we feel like it's best to tap into our home market of the Tennessee Titans and let them know basically that y'all had a joke of an off season. So
didn't get better.
We feel like if there's a way for the and the average Titans fan, aren't they just the most in-depth football learner ever?
Yeah,
they have that Steve McNair jersey that kind of has the part of the number falling off, and but they know what they're talking about always. You're gonna love what we have to say.
It is that classic joke that you go to the Titans games and it's like you still see the 2K jerseys. Like,
I don't. I mean, other than Derrick Henry, if it's not Derrick Henry, you're seeing an Eddie George. Yeah. You're going to see a Chris Johnson. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a Vince Young, a Steve McNair. I've seen more fucking Kenny Britt jerseys than I've seen Julio Jones, AJ Brown, any of them.
It is kind of funny how that all ends up working
breed,
out. Different breed. Yeah, and
we love you guys.
I guess we'll start with the Titans because they are the only team in the NFL that got worse during the draft. Day one draft night, the only team that actually got substantially worse that night, in my opinion, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Traded AJ Brown for Treylon Burks. Not great. Maybe Burks will be awesome. I have no idea on that one, but AJ Brown was awesome. Seems like you could have paid him that money, but it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Now that Debo's contract, Scary Terry, DK, all of the others that were coming out in that same class, that same realm of wide receiver, everyone's around the same. No one paid more. The Titans look like dummies for not being able to give in and figure out a way to work it with your star wide receiver, and who was a great personality to have on the team too. It's just something that you have to work on.
100% agree. So one thing that I do want to incorporate into this is doing kind of a guess the line thing, because we're going to be talking fantasy value, like season long, how many how many yards, how many points, all that stuff. Obviously, when you talk about the Titans, it's run through Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry hurt last year, only plays 8 games. But still, I mean, was in the top 5 of a lot of rushing stats there. I mean, put up 1,400 yards in 8 games. His efficiency has gone down every year the past couple of years, so that's kind of unfortunate, but still a great player. What is your guess for the total rushing yards this season for Derrick Henry?
After the injury, I think they'll move it down a hair. I'd set the line at like 1675.
Wow, you were way off on that.
Really?
The line is at 1350.
What?
Yeah, the line is at 1350.
That is Derrick Henry rushing yards.
Derrick Henry rushing yards for the 22-23 season, yes.
Bet. I'm going to lose my bank account.
Yeah, that feels like a pretty solid bet. I feel like I'm underestimating him, because what we're going to incorporate is some rankings here, and we'll go through the rankings. I'll put it on the screen right now, the Tennessee Titans rankings, just so you can kind of look at it.
That's wild. I mean, I know in an 18-game season, 1675 can be a lot, and health intact. That's where it really hurts guys, is if they miss games. But
for sure.
My God.
I sat here and I said, okay, I'm going to give the Titans less rushing yards than they've had the past 3-4 years, and I'm going to give Derrick Henry a less percentage of market share than he's had the past when he's healthy, obviously, the past couple years. And it still came out to just over 1,400 rushing yards for the season, 12 touchdowns, and then a couple receiving yards there too, not too much there. And I thought I was on the low end. I thought I kind of cut it back saying, hey, this is a guy who is set up for regression this year. This is regression for Derrick Henry.
And that is.
Yeah.
But that is a lot of guys' career year. I mean, so if that's the type of regression that I think that the books are trying to say that we're going to see too, yeah, I get it. Not a lot of guys keep going after they're 28. We have a lot of big name running backs this year in the NFL that are 28, Derrick Henry being one of them. So, but certain guys who can break the mold are just legends, Hall of Famers. Derrick Henry is that.
Mm-hmm.
I see no reason as to why the Titans' identity is changing, why they're going to be able to take a step back. I mean, we've known Derrick Henry was going to be doing what he's doing year in, year out, and he still does it. So,
I mean, you talked about identity changing. There's no reason it should. First of all, when you look at the players they've lost, they really haven't done anything to change their core, unit. I mean, yes, they traded out AJ Brown and Julio Jones for Robert Woods and Treylon Burks essentially. Now, obviously, we all I think agree that that's a downgrade, but they're they paying significantly less for it. To me, that just points to the fact that they know they're a run first football team, and I guess they don't want to send significant amount of money on the wide receivers, even though obviously we all agree AJ Brown should have stayed in Tennessee. They should have done anything they could to keep him. But that just, that is what it is.
He should have. I mean, it just, I will say this on Robert Woods' behalf. I have heard so many good things out of LA about Robert Woods and his veteran leadership, how he can help mentor young things. Cooper Kupp credits most of his success, not the stuff that he does personally, but when it comes to being able to adapt and learn the ins and outs of the game, to Robert Woods. Yeah. They said that when he went down last year, they thought it was over for that wide receiver core. Thankfully, Woods was able to come back in spite of all the injuries and stuff, but help them off the field and kind of get that group going. The Titans desperately need a guy like that because top to bottom, I mean, if you're looking at Treylon Burks, that's the thing is the role that they have put him in, he has to fill A.J. Brown's shoes, which are huge. It's lofty expectations to do for a first-year guy who wasn't even in some people's top 5 wide receivers.
Was he even drafted in the top 5? I mean, I know like 6 or 7 guys went. No, I guess he was, but still, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think he basically rounded it out right there. But
I think he was the 5th guy.
There was a lot of times where, I mean, what do you have him for right here? 850 would be, I think 850 is fair. They're going to need more though.
Yeah,
they're going to want more.
I've projected to get about 20% of the market share of the passing game essentially. So a solid wide receiver too, and I do think that that's a little bit like that's the top end of a projection for a guy who's first year in the league. We don't know what to expect from him. This is a guy who 25% of his targets in college were screen passes. So it's like, that's not, he's an explosive athlete. He's a great athlete. There's a reason he was drafted in the first round where he was. But yeah, it's certainly scary. And I feel like what I gave him was really just the situation because the next guy up is Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. He's a wide receiver too. And, I have him being a part of the offense, getting just under 500 receiving yards for the season. And, being that, solid wide receiver 3 on a run first football team, that's kind of where that usually averages out, somewhere in that ballpark. It's tough. That's a tough spot to be in where, yes, you were 1-for-1 traded for A.J. Brown, so every single Titans fan is looking at you to either be A.J. Brown or be the reason that A.J. Brown isn't here. And that's a high risk, high reward kind of thing. Yeah. And then on top of it, like the situation they're in, he has to be at the very minimum a good wide receiver 2 behind a Robert Woods, an aging Robert Woods coming off an ACL injury.
It's going to be hard with the pressure that they put on. That's why I made that joke about Titans fans early on. I'm trying to basically poke fun at you so you guys can realize that it wasn't Treylon Burks who made this trade. It was, he, while being the biggest part in this deal with A.J. Brown, of course, but the expectations that people put on him, players hear fans. They always do. Mm-hmm. And you can ruin a guy before he ever even starts. Mm-hmm. Let him be his own thing. Give him time. Give him this year. Give him several. Like, it takes time for a guy to come in. You cannot expect him to immediately come in and drop 1,200 yards.
Yep.
And be a household name and be one of the leading Titans wide receivers in history. Because guess what? Before A.J. Brown, you guys didn't have that. You've never had that. I don't want to hear about Drew Bennett. I don't want to hear about Nate Washington. you can take those names and keep them.
Do they hurt you? Are you okay?
No, I'm just trying to. I'm trying
it's okay,
to get
buddy.
the legacy fans.
Where did the Titans fan touch you? What happened?
They always touch me in the wrong ways. Listen, I'm just ready for the new era. I'm ready for these. You just got to leave Jeff Fisher, got to leave 2007, got to leave all that shit behind you, and let's get going forward, guys. All right. Every game I went to, I saw something like that happen.
I get it. You had season tickets last year. You saw all of this firsthand. Not even a Titans fan going to every Titans game.
Decades behind the rest of the NFL when it comes to that.
Yeah. Last thing I want to look at, just from the rankings I have, because we can move these around on air right now. Robert Woods projected, from my projections, 91 receptions, just over 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. Is that too lofty? Is that too much?
If he's healthy.
If he's healthy, like, that's kind of where I'm thinking. But like, is that, do you kind of look at that and think, oh, not likely? Let me go back to.
I mean, it's not that I would say that Tannehill in the yardage, the way that it shakes up is there, and there's just no other names that you can that you're gonna be plugging in. A lot of people think it's going to roll through the tight ends a lot. People thought that last year.
A.J. Brown in 13 games had 63 receptions for 869 yards. Just going back to look at last year.
Yeah, because he was hurt.
He was hurt, and he had he had some tough games here and there. So that's really the only player that you can look at from his. From this team to really project. So even that makes me think, ooh, maybe that is a little bit too much. Maybe I should bring that down a little bit. Just feels very lofty for a first year guy.
800 sprinkled in there.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe kind of
where it goes
for sure. So I'm gonna make a note there and look at that a little bit later. I'm gonna highlight that, and I'll do that off air. But that's definitely interesting. All right, let's move. You ready to move on? Do you have anything on the Titans?
I want to hit on the defense.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Bud Dupree is healthy. This defensive line, they are ready to go. I have a lot of good things about the Titans defense in my head, and because I know that it feels like we just absolutely decimated them. It's just because you have a team in your division that we're about to get to in the Colts who made all the right moves, who have their window wide open and good to go. And it's just a shame to see that the Titans were a forced pass away from making it to the AFC Championship game last year.
For sure.
And it just felt like it was good to go, foot on the gas, maybe pay the guys that you need to pay and keep this thing together. And they have a lot of different ways that it's got to work. But Farley, healthy, he's going to be there. Roger Mccreary, you have been an absolute standout in camp. That's all I've heard. Just
Roger Mccreary, second-round pick out of Auburn.
First-round grade from both of us. We were hoping that would happen, but he gets to land with us in our home, so run it. They're saying that he's going to be able to get some meaningful snaps, maybe even jump Farley for cornerback one right now.
Yeah, you're right. We don't want to end it on a sour note. To go back to last year, just a couple of things I found when I was doing research for this. Tannehill had 10.9% of his dropbacks had Julio Jones, Derrick Henry, and A.J. Brown on the field at the same time. So I know I'm kind of going all over the place because I have a defensive stat here in a second, but just to point out that like this team fought through a lot of adversity last year, and they came out on the other side, number 1 seed. And Tannehill gets a lot of hate. That playoff game I'm not going to defend, but on the year, average, is above average player in pretty much every category, including completion percentage, yards per attempt, passer rating, all that. He's above average. I'm not saying, no one's sitting here arguing he's a top 10 quarterback, but he's borderline top 15. He is. He's in the top of. He's in the top 16 of quarterbacks in the NFL. That's one of those tough arguments to make when the game he's coming off of is so bad and so season ending, obviously. But it's just to point out that this offense really, I mean, it was decimated last year. So we're talking about changes that might not make the product on the field worse. If we have Derrick Henry, Traylon Burks, and Robert Woods on the field for 16 games, you just never know how that could play out.
Credit to Vrabel with that. I think he is one of the top tier coaches in the league.
And then to flip it over to the defensive side, you were talking about cornerbacks. Man, Roger Mccreary playing really well. The Titans have drafted 4 cornerbacks in the first 2 rounds over the past 3 years, so they have put a significant amount of resources into that secondary. Hopefully that turns out into working out. I still love Farley from last year, Fulton, Molden, all these guys. They're young players. It seems like they're getting better. The defense got so much better from 2020 to 2021, and now I do think that jump is coming to where this team could be a top 10 defense in the league. That's a real possibility. They have pieces at every level.
I was going to ask you if the Titans make the playoffs, but we may save that for another day, but I mean, you give me a
It's-
yes or a no off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think so. I think just because they can win the division and make the playoffs.
Exactly.
And, the Colts are the only other
Is
team.
it division or bust?
I think so. I think there's just too many other good teams. Like, you go through the AFC, you got 4 teams in the AFC West that can realistically fight for a playoff spot. That's going to be a tough one. You look at the North, and it's like, man, I can sit there and say 3 teams that I really think can win that division and fight for a wild card spot.
It's tough.
And then
in the East,
you have the Bills, and the Dolphins on paper are going to be good. On paper, they're a quarterback away from being legit. It's
scary. That's why it sounds like we are so hard on the Titans right now, is because
they could be one of the first teams ever to go from first seed in the playoffs to not making it the next year.
It's going to be scary to think of, just because everyone else got so much better, and it's just how it goes sometimes.
All right, so we'll move on to the Jaguars here, and let's do the same thing we did with the Titans. Guess the line here for the Jaguars. Let's go Christian Kirk. Splash free agency move, which we're going to talk about free agency in the Jaguars.
They paid him.
Paid him a lot for a guy who is, in my opinion, always going to just be a wide receiver 2. Giving him wide receiver 1 money, I don't love that move. What's the over-under on his passing yards for the season?
Shit. I mean, based on what they paid the man, you're hoping for 1,100 with 10 touchdowns, but what it actually is going to be, probably 750. 750 and 6.
You are within 50. It is at 800 right now. It's at 800, and look, I mean,
and I don't know if I'd touch it.
You said 750. Looking at my rankings right here, I mean, I'm right there with you. I put him at 727. I gave him just under 17-18% of the receiving receptions, just under 20% of the receiving yards. Like that's about where I think he's going to be. Maybe I didn't give him enough touchdowns, but I'm just not going to sit here and say a guy that statistically has always been a wide receiver 2 that, production went way down when DeAndre Hopkins left the field for the Cardinals last year, is going to just automatically turn into a wide receiver 1 just because they paid him to be. I think this could be a long list of bad, free agency moves, but when you are the Jaguars, when you have the stink that the Jaguars have on them and have had on them for years, you have to overpay guys to get them to come.
You do.
I mean, that's kind of the situation they've been.
In essence, it was credited to getting A.J. Brown out of the division. I mean, that is what started this whole hoopla over wide receiver pay money, was seeing a Christian Kirk contract like that. It was Debo and all those guys saying, all right, I'm next up then, if that's our money getting, where we're at.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way that one went. So.
Man, it's just so crazy to see the DKs, the Debos, all those. I mean, there's been so many great wide receivers come out of the past couple of drafts. They're just now starting to get paid, and it is interesting that Christian Kirk ended up being a part of that group. When I don't make a top 25 list and put him on there. Just a pure talent.
I don't. Not at all. Maybe he'll prove us wrong. I do like a lot of their weapons. Yeah. I feel like it's night and day difference from what I've heard out of camp.
Oh, really?
From coming from last year with Urban being there to having Peterson there now, it's just night and day. I mean, you knew that guy. Peterson's been in the NFL, won the Super Bowl with the Eagles. He knows what he's doing. He's a quarterback guy himself. I am optimistic for this year. I do think that it's a realistic optimism, though, of let's just get going in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Let's not even look for wins and losses necessarily at the end of the year, but as much as we can just keep Trevor safe and keep Trevor building, because everyone is saying that he just reeks of Hall of Famer whenever you're just watching it. Mm-hmm. So if you have that capability, Jacksonville needs to retain it. Yes,
absolutely. Look, I think that's a great way to look at this. This isn't about the team winning. You're not trying to compete in the AFC this year. This is about getting better and building out a young unit and hopefully creating an environment of winning. What's the
a winning
buzzword?
Culture.
Yeah, that's the buzzword I'm looking
winning
for.
Culture.
To go back to free agency spending, I found this stat while I was looking at research, and I just think it's absolutely nuts. Since 2012, they have spent the most in the NFL on free agency. Right, so that is every player that wasn't on their team that they paid to come to their team. That is at $1.64 billion with a B, $billion in free agency since 2012. And they have the most losses since that in that time period. They had another splash move. They spent the most this past year in free agency of anybody else in the NFL, and it wasn't super close to this number too, if I'm remembering right. these free agent moves, these free agent splashes, they don't always work. It seems like they do this and then they lose all this great talent that goes to other teams. We've seen it time and time again. Again, this is about changing the culture, so I'm not going to dwell on that too much. Let's focus on the fantasy aspect of this team. Kind of get through this one quick, just because I think we know where the realistic expectations are. Let's start with the running back situation. Travis Etienne, James Robinson. This is a team that is coming from the head coach, coming from everything I've seen. I think running the ball is going to be important. James Robinson, his stats, honestly, from last year are so impressive when you really think about what was going on, realizing like how bad everything was, and he was still averaging 5.1 yards per carry. Absolutely nuts. Now they get Travis Etienne there, a really, really good 1-2 punch. How do you expect this to play out? Do you have any notes from free agents or from your camp research?
So my part in this, John was coming at it from the analytics and looking at it statistically. I was looking up camp notes and seeing beat writers, because they're the guys who get to go every single day and see the guys that we don't get to hear about much and then talk about it. But the ones that we do hear about, they know everything about. And Etienne has stood out.
Okay.
He is constantly just making plays that he shouldn't. He's taking screens to the house. Mm-hmm. He's taking outside runs. I will say this, though, that most people have said that they're looking at more of, like you said, a 1-2 punch. Mm-hmm. This isn't going to be the Travis Etienne show. He may be on the field and make it his own show, but when it comes to overall touch-wise, it's going to be close. Really, as it should be. James Robinson was a diamond that they found. Diamond in the rough, undrafted guy. I mean, that's all you could hope for and then some versus what he's been. And he's a workhorse back. Etienne coming off of, what was it, the Liz Frank fracture with the foot, that can debilitate a guy. They just need to play it safe with that. And honestly, it was the reason why we were confused why they took him in the first place. You don't need a running back when you're going to be pushing for 5-6 wins.
Yeah, the drafting and running, I mean, that's a push move. You never draft running back in the first round unless you really believe in it.
It's good. I mean, it is.
Yeah, so the way I have it broken down, and I'll put it on the screen real quick for anybody wanting to see, my Jaguars rankings here, you can kind of see on the right. I broke down, I gave Travis Etienne 42% of the rushing yards, and then I gave James Robinson 35%. So pretty close to a 1-2 punch. Yeah. And then Travis Etienne, fantasy-wise, takes a huge step over James Robinson, just because I also gave him some receiving work, giving him 57 receptions and 492 receiving yards, which that could go up and down a little bit. But I felt pretty good about him being utilized both on the ground and through the air. I do think that's realistic.
No, that 100% realistic. Yeah. When it comes to shotgun, if Trevor's under center, I expect James Robinson to be getting a lot of those snaps. But when it comes down to it, Peterson loves running an RPO. Nick Foles ran it to perfection. It was one of the things that kept that offense going through the loss of Carson Wentz that season. And Trevor Lawrence and his legs, Trevor Lawrence has wheels, and they will use them all day long. They're going to be running the RPO. It's going to be pretty dirty.
That'll be interesting. Last thing, I guess, we started with Christian Kirk. Do you want to touch on him again as far as his stats? Do you think 64 for 727 that I have on the screen is unrealistic, too much, too little? While you're looking at that, I will say just a quick stat. 77.9% of his routes last year did come from the slot. It kind of unlocked the potential that I think he does have from the slot. They tried to play him outside the first couple of years. Yeah. And you could see even in those first couple of years, when he went to slot, his production went way up.
It's just too hard to get him the ball.
Yeah, he's not an outside receiver for whatever reason there. Statistically, anyway, that backs that up. Not even just focus on Christian Kirk. Anything on those 4 wide receivers that you want to look at, think about.
I want to see more of LaVisca. Yeah, I think that
you've always been a fan of his.
I have. He's shown flashes when they line him up in the backfield. It was just last year was so abysmal. I just don't want to predicate anything that happened last year with LaVisca. Wipe the slate clean. He's a playmaker. He was getting the ball in the backfield sometimes. He was getting it on screens. Mm-hmm. I just want to see a good football mind put all that talent to use. I hope it does. I mean, one guy that I'm kind of drawn to for fantasy, and I know I'm going to hate myself for it, but it's Evan Ingram. I will say that a lot of the
$9 million a year.
He's getting paid for it, and they're going to run him at wide receiver a lot too, not just tight end. So they're trying to fully convert him over.
Man, I've been burned on the Evan Ingram train too many times with the Giants. It's tough for me to see him to go to the Jags and think from a fantasy perspective that I'm going to get my money's worth there.
Well, they have a drop counter they've been doing in the training camp notes that I've been looking at, and Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, and Marvin Jones are by far leading it. And they said it's not a good counter to have going. So there's been some early offensive struggles coming out of camp.
Interesting, but I mean, there's always going to be and two of those guys are new to the team, so I'll give him a little bit of a pass there. But Evan Ingram, I mean, his problem has always been drops, so
exactly.
You factor that in when you're talking about Evan Ingram a little bit. 44 for 458, nothing spectacular is my projection for Evan Ingram. Is that too low, too high? What do you think?
I want him to be a little bit higher than that, but it all comes down to, can he do it?
Yeah.
I mean, what was he supposed to be at the Giants? We were looking at this changing the tight end game for when it came to being able to stretch the field and basically play it as a 6'5" wide receiver running down the field, drop after drop.
Just did not work out. Yeah. All right, we'll move on. Anything else you want to say about the Jaguars?
No.
You're good? All right, we'll go to Colts here. Colts are a very interesting football team to talk about. We'll do the same thing. Guess the line. I guess if we're going to talk about the Colts, guess the line should be Jonathan Taylor. Where do you think that line is at? We'll just do rushing yards. I got to pull it up here. Where do you have Jonathan Taylor at rushing yards?
Well, I mean, I'll use the Derrick Henry information as a little bit of a cheat code there. I'm going to guess that they disrespected the king because that's what Derrick is. They probably gave Jonathan Taylor a little bit more, 1,400.
You were within 50 again, 1,350.
Yep. Okay, so they put him and Derrick in the same
number. Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
As they should. I feel like, listen, Jonathan Taylor is a phenomenal talent, and I know that you're going to have him outperforming that line for sure.
For sure, yeah.
What last year was historic, and I do think he's going to continue doing this. He was my favorite running back coming out.
Does he regress? Do you think he regresses a little bit from what he did last year? And that's not an insult to say he regresses.
I think he regresses a little bit just because of who you have.
He had 18-11. He had 18-11 and 18 touchdowns, so that's not a realistic thing.
What he did was unheard of. I mean, he was fighting for an MVP conversation in a realm where it's quarterbacks preseason get it.
Yeah, I had to go back and look because I wasn't 100% sure that what his numbers were last year. I couldn't remember if this was truly regression, but it is at 15. My projection is 1591, 14 touchdowns, and it's crazy to say like I'm projecting a regression out of Jonathan Taylor this year.
Yeah.
But I do think it's fair to say like with Matt Ryan at the helm, I do think they're going to be throwing the ball a little bit more than they were than they were last year near the end when Carson Wentz. I mean the wheels fell off in the last 6 or 7 games for Carson Wentz. And they did kind of say, okay, Jonathan Taylor, you got to run the show here. You got to control the game.
We're not going to let Wentz lose us a game. That's what it was getting to, unfortunately. There were times where Wentz made great plays, but late crunch time, I cannot tell you how many bonehead moves that I saw that either put them in a spot where it was a long third down or just completely gave the ball away. Mm-hmm. It's just completely inaccurate, wild all the time. You need a guy who can be a little bit safer, closer to what you need. And Matt Ryan was a very, very underrated. I compared it to I don't want to say it as in like Super Bowl right away, but Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford is better than Matt Ryan, of course, as we know. Yeah. Matt Ryan's a little more removed from his prime than what you would want. Mm-hmm. But it is a Matthew Stafford-esque signing. This team was quarterback away ready. They paid a lot less. They didn't invest as much as they, because they have all that stuff that they've sent in the quarterbacks in the past. I think it's going to be really good for this team, though. They have a damn good defense, too. So statistically, and I was going to break it down and like talk about every way that Matt Ryan's better, but you go down the numbers, you go down the advanced stats. Matt Ryan last year was statistically an improvement in every major passing category. Obviously, not to mention the leadership and accountability. The only one that he wasn't was deep ball accuracy. Carson Wentz had him there. Carson Wentz has the bigger arm. I mean, we knew that coming in. So no surprise there. I think that those numbers should be even more emphasized when you look at the teams that the two players were playing on. Matt Ryan was not playing on a very good team. Matt Ryan was winning the Falcons games that Falcons probably shouldn't have won last year, making what could have been or should have been a 4-win team, a 6-win team, or 7-win team, whatever the Falcons ended up with last year. And then Carson Wentz realistically was losing games for the Colts there at the end. Definitely was. I mean, they shouldn't have lost to the Jaguars the last game of the season. So that's kind of it's just interesting to see the dynamics, see the improvement that we're seeing from this team. Only big other change offensively is Alec Pierce getting drafted in the 2nd round. How that affects Michael Pittman, who had a standout season last year. Paris Campbell, who I don't know if you've heard anything about him, but I've seen a couple things saying that he's improved or that he's still very good. They've been taking shots at wide receiver in the 2nd round.
Yeah, consistently.
Waiting for one of them to hit, and hopefully with the Matt Ryan, I really think that's going to help. Now, I'll say this. A lot of the writers have said that the red zone struggles have followed Matt over from Atlanta.
Really?
Yes. So when it comes to 7-on-7s, the offense is dominating, as they should. That's set up for the offense to win. But when they get to the red zone, for some reason, he becomes inaccurate. So it's something to look at, something to remember when it's later on. But they said his connection with Michael Pittman is there.
Is legit.
Is there.
I have him
Pittman is due for a huge breakout.
I have him for 89 receptions, 1,100 yards, 5 touchdowns. Too low?
That is a top 10 wide receiver year, I'm pretty sure.
He was 13. Yeah, it'd be in that range for sure. He'd be
it's close.
There's 20 top 10 receivers.
A lot of people, I mean, I feel like that is it's still an underrated thing to say, but it's the most popular underrated thing, if that makes sense. That's what everyone's saying.
Yeah, Michael Pittman is
top 10.
Yeah, for sure. He's circled by a lot of people to be the dude. When you look at Alec Pierce, when you look at Paris Campbell, so I'm still a big fan of Paris Campbell. He was my favorite wide receiver coming out that year, or at least top 2 or 3. I can't really remember anymore. But Paris Campbell, he's been injured pretty much every year he's been in the league. If he can be healthy, I still believe in the talent, which it's tough coming out this many injuries coming out of Ohio State. You just never know how that's going to affect your athleticism, your skill set. Have you heard anything there? Am I crazy? Am I still just holding on to past dreams?
I mean, I didn't see anything that popped off immediately. It was Alec Pierce going at one-on-ones against the newly signed Stephon Gilmore.
Okay.
They added Stephon Gilmore, which was a pretty big honor, I would say, for Alec Pierce, showing that he was able to come out that much and say, welcome to the NFL, take on Stephon Gilmore. One dropped off just a hair, but still a good addition to that defense. So
I was just curious if there was anything there. I would say Alec Pierce would be the
standout that I've seen more about.
Understood. Paris Campbell, he's still that guy I'll draft in the 19th round of our keeper league, just in case.
One more thing, though. Yes. Nyheim Hines is involved a lot more than what people want to admit. Fantasy owners.
That's where I was going next.
Oh, really?
Yes, that's funny. So
I saw them talking about that a lot, saying that this is the Jonathan Taylor show as much as they're going to keep on stage, though. Because Nyheim Hines, he's going to be out there.
Nyheim Hines had 6.1 yards per touch last year, which was a career high. He was underutilized due to, obviously, Taylor going off, but don't forget about him. I mean, there's no reason if you have a 15-round draft that Nyheim Hines shouldn't be on a roster.
Yeah.
He's that type of guy. He is a good player. There's just no doubt about it. Now, realistically...
They paid him, too.
Yeah, absolutely. So... realistically, is he probably going to be one of those situations where both running backs are on the field? He's getting a little bit of that slot and other type of usage. Is that what we're expecting here?
Yeah, I expect him to come in on, like, if it's a passing down on third down, I think Nyheim Hines will be taking the snap. Not saying that Jonathan Taylor can't do it, but Nyheim Hines, I mean, if you have two guys who can do the same thing and you're looking at this from a realistic standpoint, you're not looking at fantasy numbers, you're not looking at anything trying to help your own self. What can run a football team better is a fresh Jonathan Taylor and a Nyheim Hines who can come in and contribute on the passing game.
Yeah.
And they have that, and they've used that time in and time out. We were here, Jonathan Taylor's rookie year, screaming our heads off saying, get him the ball, he's good. And I cannot tell you how many people argued against us saying, it's Nyheim Hines there, they had another guy who was coming in, taking some work away from him. I can't remember at the time.
Marlon Mack got hurt.
Marlon Mack, yeah.
Well, he got hurt early on that first year, and then somebody else did come in. I forget who it was, though. Was it Wilkins?
It was just unfortunate because we were like, oh, it's the Jonathan Taylor show. Yeah. And Frank Reich was like, nope, not yet.
Should have been.
Not yet, but now it is. So we're good.
Yeah, that's great. I had him that rookie year in fantasy, and I was really hoping. I paid a lot of money a lot of draft capital to try and get him. All right, anything else? Well, there's a couple other places I want to go. Just as a team, as a whole, third easiest schedule in this year based on Vegas over-unders of their opponents is the third easiest schedule in the NFL, which I like doing that more than just like looking at last year's stats. I think Vegas is usually pretty close to write about what teams are going to be doing. Frank Reich is 0-4 in season openers as a head coach, and this actually goes back 8 years. The Colts have not won a season opener in 8 years.
Wow.
They play the Texans week 1. That's just something to remember. Like season opener, it's coming. It's just under a month away now, and that's a game. I think I'm going to bet Texans money line. Just to see if it keeps rolling the same way. Texans money line on the Colts. It's going to be super juiced over the Colts, but 8 years in a row, I'll see what happens. I don't know. I'm not saying the Colts are are not better than the Texans. I'm just saying that's a stat that I'll follow. Just I won't bet a lot on it, but that's a stat though, right?
I mean, with Texans money line, I guess it's our transition to our final spot.
Let's do it. Yeah, I don't really have anything else. Last thing, Priest Holmes was the last guy to go back-to-back running back ones in a season, like year over year. So Jonathan Taylor, he could do it, but it'd be the first time in a long time for a running back to do that.
It would.
All right, we'll go to the Texans again. Another team where it's like, what do you talk about outside of Brandon Cooks? I mean, honestly. Running back situation isn't awesome to look at. The wide receiver situation outside of Brandon Cooks isn't great. John Mechie just got hurt or has some issues, so he's not going to be involved. What do we do? What's going on?
We're going to talk about Damian Pierce.
Damian Pierce, all right.
Lovie Smith has said that he has a workhorse mentality, and he's just a tough guy. And I think Lovie's drawn to those type of guys, just the way that he played back in the day. He said that when he runs on offense, he's trying to hit like he's on defense. And Davis Mills has stood out a lot with just his mechanics have improved a lot. And Brandon Cooks, listen, I know we scrutinized it as it should have been whenever the Texans got rid of DeAndre Hopkins for a second-round pick like they did. They turned that second-round pick, though, into a Brandon Cooks.
Yeah.
And since then, Brandon Cooks has outperformed D-Hops.
Statistically, yes. Really? I didn't realize that.
Statistically, he has.
Okay.
Statistically, Brandon Cooks has just a little over 2,000 yards.
Are you saying he's outperformed D-Hop since the trade? Like D-Hop's okay. So that makes sense because there's been injuries.
I know D-Hop's has been hurt, and D-Hop's has a suspension coming up. But knowing all that in the grand scheme of things, listen, we have to cut them a little bit of slack with it being the Texans.
Brandon Cooks is a good player. There's no doubt about it.
They had no market for a big name like that who didn't want to be there, and I don't know. Brandon Cooks is an unsung hero. I'm looking to snag him in almost every single fantasy draft that I can.
Yeah, I mean, he's just the guy who he's going to fall because he's on the Texans. But, I mean, projecting him to have 80, 90 receiving yards over 1,000, 80, 90 receptions over 1,000 yards, 5, 6 touchdowns, like that's pretty standard. Like that's pretty that'd probably be on the low end, honestly, realistically, of where you would have it. Be interesting to see. The Damian Pierce thing is interesting. He's the kid out of Florida, right? Florida running back?
I know a lot of people aren't super high. I'm not sure exactly. I know a lot of people aren't super high on him right away, but I'm saying I think that's a guy you could snag late, and as the year goes on, you're going to start to see this really separate itself with
fourth rounder out of Florida. I just looked it up there. That'll be interesting. Marlon Mack is there, so he's another guy, which is just a name that, like, man, I do think he's a solid running back. I'm not going to sit here and pound the table for Marlon Mack, but for a team that was the worst rushing team in the league last year and rushed the ball the third most of any team on early downs. Man, it was a terrible, terrible thought process. When you were statistically the worst in years. I think if you go back to 2000, there's a stat that I read. I didn't put it on here just because it was a little wordy, but you go back to 2000, their rushing percentage on early downs and early percentage of the game was the worst in years. So like they're statistically a terribly inefficient running game
before they ever get going.
And then they are running the ball at a higher rate than almost any team in the NFL. It makes absolutely no sense from a logic standpoint, especially when you're in a rebuild year. This is still a rebuild year. What do we need from this team more than anything else? What is Davis Mills? That is the only question we really need to answer, because nothing else really matters. I'm not worried about getting to 5 or 6 wins.
Yeah.
I'm worried about saying, hey, have we seen enough? Can Davis Mills perform in the big game? Can he win us a couple games down the stretch? Can he improve the roster? Can he make a Nico Collins, who's going to be slotted in as that wide receiver 2, look like a wide receiver 1 in those big moments? Can he get the most out of Brandon Cooks in those big moments? That's what we need to see. It's not always going to work out. He's going to have some bad moments just because it's a bad team.
I'm going to say yes, though.
You think so?
I know it's weird, and I know it's not the sexy thing to say. I'll also preface it by saying this. I think Davis Mills, at his best, at his absolute best, can be a top 5, sit at 15. That's his pinnacle. That's his peak where he can go is 15. But what he was able to do last year, we saw Zach Wilson, we saw Trevor Lawrence, Mac Jones, yes, in the good system, outperformed Davis Mills technically, but Davis Mills was given nothing when it comes to this team. No expectations other than you're about to go win 1 or 2 games. And yes, the record wasn't pretty, they didn't get a lot done, but I promise you put Trevor Lawrence in that spot, they're failing. You put Zach Wilson in that spot, they're failing. Mac Jones, they are blowing up astronomically versus putting Davis Mills wherever in the other spot the guy's landed. I'm saying give the guy a chance. Last year, he was one of the best rookie quarterbacks out there.
Yeah. Yeah, statistically just behind
Mac
Jones.
I love Trevor Lawrence, too.
Yeah.
I think he is the surest thing since a Hall of Famer that we've seen come out of college. I'm here for it, but I'm trying to give Davis his props with saying last year sucked, and he did it.
We forgot to do Guess the Line. I wanted to do it real quick with Brandon Cooks. What would you guess the line there?
I would want him, if it's 1,000, I'm hitting the over.
Oh, yeah. So it's at 950. You've been within 50 on every single one except for Derrick Henry. So that's pretty impressive. That is your, this is your game, man. You're really good at that.
Yeah, I usually try to, I think about the numbers a little bit. So I would take the over on that, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I have him getting over 100 more than that right now. And
correct me if
these
I'm
numbers
wrong,
are going to
I think he has the longest streak in the league of consecutive 1,000-yard seasons.
If that's true, I didn't realize that, but I will
sure
say
he's at 8 in a row.
I will say he had 74 more targets, 57 more receptions, and 591 more yards than any other player on his team last year. So he is a guy. He's the dude. He is the dude. They swung and missed with Mechie. That's a medical issue, so it's unfortunate to say that.
Better too,
absolutely, like that. It's genuinely very sad and very unfortunate, but it is what it is. That's where we're at. So a swing and a miss right there, and hopefully he can come back next year and be better and stronger. But yeah, Nico Collins, second or third round pick out of Michigan 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Hopefully, not a great unit, but hopefully you have some pieces. Hopefully Damian Pierce shows up in a big way. Defensively, I think you're going to struggle. I don't have a lot of stats defensively. I don't know if you do. But
not defensively. I want to say that they just added Chester Rogers about 2 or 3 days ago.
Okay.
He just hopped into camp and made an immediate difference, which tells me that they didn't like some of the guys in the wide receiver room later on that depth chart. Mm-hmm. So if they're still looking this late into camp for guys to come on, Chester Rogers came in immediately. He was with the Titans years ago, I think with the Colts also. Mm-hmm. He might be able to get some numbers here.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Last thing before we head out here, Houston Texans. I mean, the rich get richer and the weak get poorer because they have the 5th hardest strength of schedule this year, while the Colts have the 3rd easiest. That is
damn.
That's interesting, man. Yeah, they got kind of pwned a little bit. It's just because they were a bottom 5 team, but they did technically get that 3rd spot in the division, and that's kind of what it bases on. So apparently that's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah, I mean, and if your crossover is the AFC West.
Yeah. Doesn't
God
matter.
Save you.
Yeah, that's a tough division to face. Anything else you want to say before we get out of here? We'll be back tomorrow with NFC.
Keep these divisions rolling. We're glad to be back. Thank you.
Yeah. Peace.
7.